A routine checkup turned into an unexpected reunion. A past love returned, bringing back memories and long-buried secrets. Amid broken promises and a destiny intertwined, the truth had to come out. But when the past and present collide, everything can change. Before diving into this emotional story of reunions and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Sarah nervously adjusted the thin hospital gown while waiting on the examination table. It was just another routine checkup, she thought, trying to distract herself with the pastel-colored walls and framed diplomas. Dr. Sanders' office was temporarily closed for renovation, and she had been redirected to another doctor at the clinic. A last-minute replacement, they said at reception. The door opened with a soft click and Sarah felt the air escape from her lungs. Standing in the doorway with a chart in his hands was Richard Miller, the same boy who had given her her first kiss 15 years ago under the old mango tree in her grandmother's backyard. Except he wasn't a boy anymore, but a grown man, wearing an impeccably white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. "Ms. Reed." His voice was controlled, professional, but Sarah noticed the slight tremor in the last syllable. His brown eyes, still as expressive as she remembered, revealed a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't, or didn't want to, identify. "I can call another doctor if you prefer," he offered after a moment of loaded silence. "That won't be necessary," she replied more sharply than intended. "We're adults now, aren't we? And you're just the doctor on duty." Richard nodded, maintaining professional composure as he began reviewing the chart. Sarah discreetly observed his hands, strong and steady, handling the papers. They were the same hands that had once held hers with such tenderness, promising a future that never came to be. The examination proceeded in tense silence, broken only by necessary instructions and monosyllabic responses. Sarah fixed her gaze on the ceiling, trying to ignore the whirlwind of memories his presence awakened, study afternoons that turned into hidden kissing sessions, promises whispered under the stars, naive plans for a shared future. "Your tests indicate we'll need bi-weekly follow-ups," Richard explained at the end of the consultation, his professional voice masking any emotion. "I'll give you a card with the dates." He extended a white card, and when Sarah took it, she noticed something written on the back, a phone number and a simple message. "Coffee sometime. I think I owe you some explanations." Sarah's heart raced, betraying the calm she was trying to maintain. 15 years had passed since Richard disappeared from her life without explanation, leaving only silence and unanswered questions. Now he was here, offering the answers she had once so desperately wanted. Back at the bookstore she managed with Sophie, her best friend since school days, Sarah couldn't concentrate on work. The card with Richard's number seemed to burn in her pocket, and the memories she had so carefully guarded began to leak through the cracks of her determination. "You have to call him," Sophie insisted after hearing about the encounter. "The universe doesn't create coincidences like this for nothing. It's destiny, Sarah." "Destiny?" Sarah laughed humorlessly. "Destiny had its chance 15 years ago, Sophie. Now we're different people with different lives. I have responsibilities. So I have Luke. And that's exactly why you need this conversation," Sophie argued, her green eyes shining with determination. "Some stories need a proper ending so we can truly move forward." Sarah sighed, her fingers unconsciously touching the card in her pocket. Sophie was right. There were unresolved issues, unspoken words, explanations never offered. And now, after so long, the past was knocking at her door, wearing a white coat and carrying the weight of 15 years of silence. That night, after putting Luke to bed, Sarah sat on her porch with a cup of tea and Richard's card. The number stared back at her, provocative, like a portal to a past she had tried so hard to overcome. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and began typing a message. "About that coffee, still on?" The reply came almost instantly. "Tomorrow 3 p.m. Serenity Cafe?" Sarah looked at Luke's photo on the wall, his brown eyes so similar to the uncle he never knew, and replied with a simple, "Okay." The past and present were about to collide, and she could only hope her heart was prepared for the impact. The Serenity Cafe maintained the same vintage charm Sarah remembered from her previous visits. She arrived a few minutes before the agreed time, choosing a discreet table near the window. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the space, but even that couldn't calm her nerves. Richard arrived precisely at 3 p.m., wearing slacks and a light blue shirt, a significant change from the white coat of the previous day. His eyes found hers immediately, as if they already knew exactly where to look. "You still take cappuccino with cinnamon?" he asked as he approached, a small, nostalgic smile on his lips. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. 15 years had passed, and he still remembered her favorite order. "Yes," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Some things don't change." "And others change completely," he completed, sitting across from her. The weight of those words hung between them like an invisible curtain. After placing their orders, an uncomfortable silence settled in. There were so many questions, so many necessary explanations, that neither knew where to begin. "Why did you disappear, Richard?" Sarah finally asked, deciding to get straight to the point. "One day we were making plans for the future, and the next you just vanished." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she recognized from their teenage years. "It wasn't an easy choice, Sarah. My father had a serious heart attack at that time. The business went bankrupt. We lost practically everything. My Uncle Frank offered to pay for my medical studies, but there was one condition." "What condition?" Sarah asked, though something inside her already knew the answer. "He demanded that I cut all ties with my past, including you." Richard paused, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. "My uncle believed youthful relationships were a distraction, that I needed to focus exclusively on my studies. It was either that or giving up on my dream of becoming a doctor." Sarah felt a mixture of anger and understanding stirring in her chest. "And you couldn't at least explain this to me? A letter, a phone call?" "My uncle controlled everything, Sarah. He transferred me to a university in another state, monitored my calls, my contacts. It was cruel, I know, but at the time it seemed like the only way out. My family depended on me." The waiter arrived with their orders, providing a brief pause in the loaded conversation. Sarah observed the cinnamon sprinkled over the foam of her cappuccino, remembering so many shared afternoons in that same cafe. "And your brother?" "Charles also disappeared around the same time," she commented, her heart accelerating as she mentioned that name. Richard frowned. "Charles, he was always rebellious. He rejected our uncle's help, said he wouldn't submit to conditions. He ended up going his own way. We lost contact for years." He paused, studying Sarah's expression. Did you meet my brother after I left?" Before Sarah could answer, her cell phone rang. Luke's school name flashed on the screen, making her stomach sink. "Hello, yes, I'm his mother. What? No, I'm coming right now." "Did something happen?" Richard asked, noticing her paleness. "Luke, my son, had an asthma attack at school." Sarah began gathering her things hurriedly. "I need to go." "I'll drive you," Richard offered, already standing. "I'm in my car and I know asthma attacks well. I'm a pediatrician, remember?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, but her concern for Luke spoke louder. "Okay, let's go." During the drive to the school, Richard maintained a calm conversation, clearly trying to distract her from worrying. But Sarah's mind was in turmoil. In just a few minutes, Richard would meet Luke, and with him, a truth that would change everything. Arriving at the school, they were directed to the infirmary. Luke was sitting on a cot, breathing with the help of an inhaler. His brown eyes, identical to the uncle he had never met, widened when he saw his mother. "Mom," he called, extending his arms. Sarah ran to hug him, while Richard observed the scene from the doorway. There was something familiar about that boy that he couldn't explain, the shape of his eyes, the way he furrowed his brow. "Dr. Miller." The nurse recognized him. "So glad you're here. Luke is much better, but maybe you should take a look at him." Richard approached, entering his professional mode. While examining the boy, he noticed more and more inexplicable similarities, the shy smile, the dimples in his cheeks. "How old are you, Luke?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. 9, the boy answered, looking curiously at the stethoscope. Richard made a quick mental calculation, his heart racing. 9 years. which means Luke was conceived approximately 1 year after his departure. And those similarities? His eyes met Sarah's, who was observing the interaction with a mixture of fear and resignation. There was much more to this story than some explanations about an interrupted teenage romance. "Sarah," he began, but she interrupted him. "Not here," she whispered. "Not in front of him." Richard nodded, understanding. He finished the examination in silence, prescribed the necessary medications, and watched as Sarah helped Luke gather his things. "May I stop by your house later?" he asked quietly when Luke went to the bathroom. "I think we have much more to talk about." Sarah hesitated but knew she couldn't postpone this conversation any longer. At 8, after Luke is asleep. As he watched them leave, Richard remained standing in the school hallway, his mind a storm of questions. That boy, could it be, but the eyes, the smile, they were so much like Charles's. The returning past brought not only old memories of teenage love, but also secrets that, he sensed, would change his life forever. At precisely 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sarah took a deep breath, checking one last time that Luke was sleeping peacefully in his room. The little boy, recovered from his asthma attack, had fallen asleep while she read his favorite story. Richard was standing at her door, still in his social clothes from the cafe, but with a visibly tenser demeanor. In his hands he held a folder of documents that Sarah hadn't noticed before. "Before you start," she said, leading him to the living room, "I need you to listen without interruptions." He nodded, sitting on the couch while his eyes scanned the environment, pausing at the photographs of Luke scattered around the walls. In each one, the similarities with his brother Charles were even more evident. "After you left," Sarah began, her voice low but firm, "I was devastated. I spent months trying to understand what had happened, why you had disappeared like that. It was during that time that I ran into Charles again." Richard tensed his shoulders, but kept his promise of silence. He was different from the rebellious boy I knew from school days. He seemed more mature, more centered. "Charles told me about the family situation, about your move to another city. We began to get closer, first as friends, then—" She paused, carefully choosing her words. "It was an intense and turbulent relationship. We got married just 3 months after we started dating." "Sarah," Richard began, but she raised her hand, asking him to let her continue. "The marriage lasted less than a year. Charles was unstable, had problems with alcohol. When I discovered I was pregnant, he had already disappeared. He simply took the car one night and never came back." Sarah got up, walking to a bookshelf where she kept an old box. From inside it, she removed a yellowed newspaper clipping. 2 weeks later, I received this news. Charles's car had been found, destroyed in a ravine. His documents were there, but— She handed the clipping to Richard, who took it with trembling hands. "The body was never found." Richard examined the article in silence, his hands squeezing the paper tightly. "Why wasn't anyone in the family informed? Charles had cut ties with all of you. In his documents, I was his only contact." Sarah sat again, now in an armchair nearby. "When Luke was born, 6 months later, I was alone. Legally, as Charles's widow, I was able to register the boy as his child. Over time, I officially became his adoptive mother. So Luke is—" Richard couldn't complete the sentence, the reality hitting him like a punch. "Your nephew?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed softly. "And before you ask, no. I never sought you out to tell you. The Miller family had made their position on ties with the past very clear." Richard rose abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "You don't understand, Sarah. Uncle Frank, he died 5 years ago. All those rules, those impositions, they don't mean anything anymore. I came back to town precisely to reconnect with my past, to try to fix my mistakes." "And now?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "What do you intend to do with this information?" Richard sat back down, opening the folder he had brought. "These are the documents I managed to gather about Charles's disappearance. Police reports, private investigations. I never accepted the official version of the accident." Sarah leaned forward, interested. "What do you mean?" There are inconsistencies in the reports. The car was in perfect mechanical condition. The weather was good that night, and Charles knew that road well. Richard spread some papers on the coffee table. Additionally, there were strange movements in his bank accounts days before the disappearance. "You think that," Sarah began, but was interrupted by a noise coming from the hallway. "Mom," Luke's sleepy voice called. "Is someone talking?" Sarah rose quickly, putting away the documents. "I'm coming, honey. Go back to bed." Richard watched as she disappeared down the hallway, his heart divided between the discovery of the nephew he never knew he had and the mysteries that still surrounded his brother's disappearance. Minutes later, Sarah returned. "For he had a nightmare. He's sleeping again now." "Sarah," Richard spoke softly, "I want to be part of his life, not as a stranger who appeared out of nowhere, but gradually, if you'll allow it. And also," he hesitated for a moment, "I want your help to find out what really happened to Charles." "Why?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because Luke deserves to know the truth about his biological father. And because—" he looked at her intensely. "Some stories need to be properly concluded so new ones can begin." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken possibilities. Through the living room window, the full moon gently illuminated the environment, a silent witness to long-kept secrets and truths yet to be revealed. Sarah looked toward the hallway where her son slept, then at the man before her. The uncle Luke never knew, the love she never truly forgot. Her answer would change not just her life, but also the future of her carefully constructed small world. The following weeks brought a new routine for Sarah and Luke. Richard, keeping his promise, gradually began to insert himself into their lives. It started with casual visits to the bookstore, always with the excuse of looking for a specific medical book or asking for reading recommendations. Luke, curious and vivacious as always, soon got used to Dr. Richard's presence. The boy was fascinated by the stories the doctor told about his work at the children's hospital, and it wasn't long before Richard became a constant presence in his conversations. "Mom," Dr. Richard said, "we can visit the hospital one of these days." Luke exclaimed excitedly during dinner, about a month after the reunion at the doctor's office. "He's going to show me how a real X-ray machine works." Sarah smiled, trying to hide the mix of emotions she felt. Seeing Luke's enthusiasm was wonderful, but it also brought up fears she struggled to keep under control. What if Luke discovered the truth before they were ready to tell him? What if he felt betrayed by all these secrets? "That sounds great, honey," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "But remember, Dr. Richard is very busy. We can't take advantage of his goodwill." "Oh, but he said he loves spending time with me," Luke countered, his eyes shining. "Did you know he also liked putting together puzzles when he was a kid? Just like me." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Each new similarity discovered between uncle and nephew was like a reminder of lost time, of untold truths. That night, after putting Luke to bed, Sarah found Richard waiting for her on the porch. These nighttime conversations had become frequent, always revolving around two main themes: the past they shared and the mystery surrounding Charles's disappearance. "I got some more information," Richard said softly, as soon as she sat beside him. "An old college friend of Charles contacted me. Apparently my brother was involved in some kind of controversial research before disappearing." Sarah frowned. "What kind of research?" "I don't have concrete details yet, but it seems it was something related to alternative treatments for degenerative diseases." Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah now recognized as a sign of his frustration. "The problem is that some of the substances he was studying weren't exactly legal." "My God," Sarah murmured, the concern evident in her voice. "Do you think this has something to do with the accident?" "Honestly, I don't know, but it's a line of investigation we can't ignore." Richard hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss, about Luke." Her heart raced. "What about him?" "I think it's time we tell him the truth. Not all of it, of course, but at least about who I really am." Sarah rose abruptly, walking to the porch. Railing. The night was clear, stars shining brightly in the summer sky. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Richard. What if he doesn't understand? What if it confuses him even more?" Richard approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I understand. Your fear, I really do, but think about it. The longer we wait, the harder it will be. Luke is a smart kid. He must already be noticing that there's something different about how we interact." Sarah turned to face him, unshed tears shining in her eyes. "And how do we do this? How do we explain to a 9-year-old that the uncle he just met is actually the brother of the father he never got to see?" "With honesty and love," Richard answered softly, "the same way you've raised him all these years." At that moment, looking into Richard's eyes, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Trust, not just in him, but in the strength of the bond they had rebuilt over the last few weeks. "Okay," she finally agreed. "We'll tell him, but carefully, gradually." The relief on Richard's face was evident. He smiled, that smile that still made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Thank you for trusting me, Sarah. I promise I won't let you two down." The silence that followed was comfortable, full of unspoken promises and renewed hopes. Sarah allowed herself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future where she wouldn't have to carry all the secrets alone. Meanwhile, inside the house, Luke slept peacefully, unaware of the revelations that would soon change his life. In Seoul, his dreams, images of magical hospitals, giant puzzles, and a man in a white coat who smiled exactly like him mingled together. The next morning, during breakfast, Sarah observed her son with new eyes. Each gesture, each expression, now seemed loaded with hidden meanings. How to explain to this child that his family was larger and more complicated than he had ever imagined? "Luke, honey," she began hesitantly, "what do you think of Dr. Richard?" The boy looked up from his cereal bowl, a smile lighting up his face. "He's awesome, Mom. He knows everything about medicine and also likes the same games I do." "Why?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Well, it turns out that Dr. Richard and I have known each other for a very long time. Actually, he is an old family friend." Luke's eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. "Really? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Sometimes, honey, adults make mistakes. We lost touch for many years and only now found each other again." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "Actually, there's more about this story that I'd like to tell you. How about we invite Dr. Richard to dinner at our house tonight?" Luke practically jumped with excitement. Yes, can we show him my fossil collection?" Sarah smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Of course, honey. I'm sure he'll love it." As Luke ran to get ready for school, Sarah took out her phone and sent a message to Richard. "Ready for a family dinner tonight?" The response came almost instantly. "More than ready. Thank you for this, Sarah." Putting away her phone, Sarah looked at Luke's portrait on the wall. The boy's smile, so similar to Charles's, now also reminded her of Richard's. It was as if the past and present were finally beginning to align, creating a new future for all of them. That night promised to be the beginning of a new phase in their lives. With all the revelations and changes that would come, Sarah could only hope that love, the same love that had survived 15 years of separation, would be strong enough to keep her little family together. The aroma of freshly baked lasagna filled Sarah's house. Luke, dressed in his favorite solar system t-shirt, ran from one side to the other, arranging his fossil collection on the living room coffee table. The doorbell rang precisely at 7 p.m. "I'll get it," Luke shouted, running to the door. Richard was standing there holding a package wrapped in colorful paper and a bottle of wine. His eyes lit up when he saw the boy. "Hey, champ," he smiled, handing the package to Luke. "Brought a little something for you." Luke tore open the wrapping with enthusiasm, revealing a toy microscope. "Wow, now I can see my fossils up close. Thanks, Dr. Richard." Sarah watched the scene from the kitchen, her heart tight. The ease with which Richard interacted with Luke, the sparkle in her son's eyes, all of this made the task ahead even more difficult. "Welcome," she said, approaching to greet him. "Dinner's almost ready." Richard followed her to the kitchen, leaving Luke absorbed with his new present. "How are you?" he asked softly, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "Nervous," she admitted. "But I know it's the right thing to do." Dinner began in a relaxed manner. Luke dominated the conversation, alternating between stories from school and enthusiastic questions about Richard's work at the hospital. Sarah observed, amazed at the ease of interaction between uncle and nephew, even though Luke still didn't know about that bond. When desserts were served, custard, Luke's favorite, Sarah exchanged a significant look with Richard. It was time. "Luke, honey," she began, her voice soft. "Remember earlier today I said I had something important to tell you about Dr. Richard?" The boy nodded, his dessert spoon stopping midway to his mouth. "Well," she continued, taking a deep breath, "Dr. Richard isn't just a family friend. He's your father's brother." The silence that followed seemed deafening. Luke looked from Sarah to Richard, his young mind processing the information. "My father's brother," he repeated slowly. "So, he's my uncle." Richard leaned forward, his gaze gentle. "Yes, Luke, I'm your uncle, and I'm very, very happy to finally meet you." Luke frowned, a shadow of confusion in his eyes. "But why did you never come visit us before? Why did Mom never talk about you?" Sarah felt her heart tighten. This was the part she feared most. "It's complicated, honey," she began. "Sometimes families go through problems that make people drift apart. Your Uncle Richard lived far away and we lost touch for a long time. But now I'm back," Richard added quickly, "and I very much want to be part of your life, if you'll allow it." Luke was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the pudding in front of him. When he finally looked up, there was a mixture of emotions on his young face. Did you know my dad?" he asked hesitantly. Richard smiled sadly. "Yes, I did. Charles was my older brother. We grew up together." "What was he like?" Luke asked, his voice almost a whisper. Sarah and Richard exchanged glances. This was a question both feared but knew was inevitable. "Your father was very intelligent," Richard began carefully. "He loved solving puzzles just like you, and he had a smile that could light up an entire room." "Just like yours," Sarah added softly, touching Luke's hand. The boy absorbed the information in silence, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And why did he leave?" Sarah's heart broke. How to explain the complexity of the situation to a child? How to talk about Charles's mysterious disappearance without scaring Luke? "Sometimes, Luke," she began, choosing her words carefully, "things happen that we can't fully explain. Your father, he had to leave suddenly, even before knowing you. We're on the way." "But he would have loved you very much," Richard added quickly, "just as we all love you." Luke was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stood up and hugged Richard tightly. "I'm glad you're here now, Uncle Richard," he murmured against the man's chest. Richard, visibly moved, returned the hug. "Me too, champ, me too." Sarah watched the scene, silent tears streaming down her face. It was as if a long-lost piece of their life's puzzle had finally found its place. The rest of the evening proceeded in a mixture of emotions. Luke bombarded Richard with questions about his childhood with Charles, eager to learn more about the father he never got to know. Sarah, in turn, observed, occasionally intervening to ensure the revelations weren't too much for her son to absorb all at once. When it was finally time for Luke to go to bed, the boy hesitated. "Uncle Richard," he called timidly, "will you come back tomorrow?" Richard looked at Sarah, seeking her approval. She nodded softly. "Of course, champ," he answered, ruffling his nephew's hair. "How about I pick you up from school? We can get ice cream, and you can show me how this new microscope of yours works." Luke's face lit up with a smile that was pure joy. "Deal!" After Luke finally went to bed, Sarah and Richard sat on the porch, as they had done so many nights in the past few weeks. The silence between them was comfortable, full of relief and hope. "Thank you," Sarah finally said, her voice low, "for being so patient, so kind with him." Richard took her hand, squeezing it gently. "He's amazing, Sarah. You've done a wonderful job raising him." She smiled, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. "We still have so much to discover, so much to explain." "And we'll do it together," he completed, "one day at a time." As they looked at the stars, both felt that a new chapter was beginning. A chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also full of possibilities and, above all, love. In the room next door, Luke slept peacefully, his dreams now populated by images of a father he never knew and an uncle who had just entered his life. In his small hand, he firmly held a fossil, a tangible reminder that the past, no matter how distant it seems, always has something to teach us about the present and future. The weeks that followed brought a new routine for the small family. Richard had become a constant presence, dividing his time between the hospital and Sarah and Luke's home. For the boy, it was as if a whole world of possibilities had opened up. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Richard took Luke to the park. Sarah watched them from a distance, sitting on a bench, pretending to read a book while her heart warmed at the scene before her. "Look, Uncle Richard!" Luke shouted, balancing precariously at the top of the slide. "I'm almost touching the sky!" Richard, with his arms extended ready to catch his nephew if necessary, laughed. "Careful up there, astronaut. We don't want you taking off without your spaceship." Sarah couldn't help but smile. The ease with which Richard had fit into their lives was surprising. It was as if he had always been there, filling a void she didn't even know existed. Later that night, after Luke finally fell asleep, exhausted from his adventures in the park, Sarah and Richard sat on the porch, as they had done so many times before. "He asked about Charles today," Richard said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Sarah felt her heart tighten. What did he want to know? He wanted to know if Charles liked stars as much as he does. Richard smiled sadly. "I told him about the nights we spent on the roof of our house, observing the constellations." "And how did he react?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that maybe if he looked hard enough he could see his father among the stars." Richard paused, swallowing hard. "Sarah, I think it's time we intensify our search for answers. Luke deserves to know the truth about what happened to Charles." Sarah nodded slowly. The past few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, but she knew Richard was right. The mystery of Charles's disappearance hung over them like a dark cloud, threatening the happiness they were building. "Where do we start?" she asked, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Richard pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Remember that college friend? Have Charles that I mentioned. He sent me this." He opened the envelope, revealing a series of documents. "These are Charles's research notes. Most of it is coded, but there are mentions of a substance called Project Aurora." Sarah frowned, taking one of the sheets. "What is this?" "I'm not sure," Richard admitted. "But from what I could decipher, it seems to be some kind of experimental compound. Charles believed it could be a revolutionary breakthrough in treating neurodegenerative diseases." "But why would this lead to his disappearance?" Sarah questioned, the concern evident in her voice. Richard hesitated. There are mentions of unexpected side effects, and a group of investors who were very interested in the results." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with unspoken implications. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What exactly had Charles discovered, and to what extent had this discovery put him in danger? "Richard," she began, her voice trembling slightly, What if we discover something we don't want to know? What if the truth is worse than the uncertainty?" He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then we'll face it together. For Luke, for Charles, for us." At that moment, looking into Richard's eyes, Sarah felt a wave of emotions she hadn't experienced in years. Fear, yes, but also hope, determination, and something else. Something she didn't dare name yet. A scream from Luke's room broke the moment. In seconds, both were by the boy's bed, who was thrashing in the midst of a nightmare. "Dad! Dad!" Luke called, tears streaming down his sleeping face. Sarah hugged him, whispering words of comfort while Richard gently stroked his hair. Gradually, Luke calmed down, his eyes opening slowly. "Mom? Uncle Richard?" he murmured, still sleepy. "We're here, honey." Sarah replied, kissing his forehead. It was just a bad dream. Luke nestled closer to her. I dreamed about Dad. He was lost in a dark forest, calling for help. Richard and Sarah exchanged worried looks over the boy's head. Your father is in a safe place now, Luke, Richard said softly, and he would be very proud of the brave boy you are. Gradually, Luke fell back asleep, this time with a more peaceful sleep. Sarah and Richard remained by his bed for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Back on the porch, the night air seemed colder, heavier with the weight of the decisions that needed to be made. We can't postpone it any longer, Sarah finally said. For Luke, we need to find out what happened to Charles. Richard nodded, his face a mask of determination. Tomorrow we'll start deciphering these notes. I have a friend at the university lab who can help us with the more technical parts. As they planned their next steps, neither noticed the shadowy figure watching them from the street, partially hidden by the shadows of an ancient oak tree. The man brought a phone to his ear. Sir, he said in a low voice, it seems we have a problem. They're investigating Project Aurora. From the other end of the line, a cold voice replied, Keep them under surveillance. We cannot allow the truth to come to light. Not now. Not after all this time. The figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of a silent threat. On the porch, oblivious to the approaching danger, Sarah and Richard continued to plan, united by their love for Luke and the search for the truth about Charles. As the night progressed, the stars shone in the sky, silent witnesses to long-buried secrets and an uncertain future that was slowly unfolding before them. The Central University Laboratory was quiet that Sunday morning. Sarah and Richard followed Dr. Anthony Vasquez, an old friend of Richard's from college days, through the empty corridors. The characteristic smell of chemicals and the soft hum of equipment created an almost surreal atmosphere. Here we are, said Dr. Vasquez, opening the door to a room filled with microscopes and state-of-the-art computers. We can work without interruptions. Richard placed the envelope with Charles's notes on the table. Thank you for helping us, Anthony. I know it's risky. The scientist made a dismissive gesture with his hand. Charles was my friend too. If there's a chance of finding out what happened to him, I'm in. In the hours that followed, the three pored over Charles's coded notes. Sarah, although without scientific training, proved skilled at identifying patterns and helping with decoding. Look at this, she called, pointing to a sequence of symbols. This part repeats several times, always followed by different numerical combinations. Dr. Vasquez leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Good observation. It looks like a molecular formula, but with some variations. Fascinating. Richard frowned, studying a complex diagram. Anthony, this looks familiar to me. Isn't it similar to that neural regeneration research that was in development a few years ago? The scientist nodded slowly, his eyes widening in recognition. Yes, but this is much more advanced. If I'm interpreting correctly, Charles was working on something revolutionary. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Project Aurora, she murmured. Exactly, confirmed Dr. Vasquez. But look at this. He pointed to a series of marginal notes, almost illegible. Charles was worried about something. He mentions unpredictable, side effects and mind control. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were frightening. If Charles had discovered a way to manipulate the human mind, it was no wonder powerful people were interested, or that he had become a target. We need to be extremely careful with this information, Richard finally said, his voice tense. If the wrong people find out we're investigating this. No sooner had he finished speaking than the sound of breaking glass echoed through the laboratory. Our stone, wrapped in a piece of paper, landed in the middle of the room. Sarah, with trembling hands, unfolded the paper. On it, a single sentence was written in letters cut out from magazines. Stop now, or the boy will be next. Panic instantly took hold of her. Luke, she cried, already running for the door. Richard followed close behind, shouting over his shoulder, Anthony, call the police. The journey to Sarah's house seemed endless. When they finally arrived, they found the babysitter. Sophie in a panic at the door. Sarah, thank God you're here, she exclaimed. A strange man was lurking around the house. When I confronted him, he ran away, but he left this. Sophie handed over an envelope. Inside was a photo of Luke playing in the park the day before, with a red X drawn over his face. Sarah felt her legs weaken. Richard held her, leading her into the house. "Luke!" she called, her voice choked. "I'm here, Mum," came the response from the bedroom. The boy appeared in the doorway, confused by all the commotion. "What's happening?" Sarah hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Richard joined the hug, forming a protective shield around his nephew. In the days that followed, the small family's life changed drastically. Police officers made frequent rounds through the neighborhood, and Richard practically moved into Sarah's house, sleeping on the couch to ensure everyone's safety. Luke, perceptive as always, knew something was wrong, even though the adults tried to protect him from the full truth. "It's because of Dad, isn't it?" he asked one night as Sarah was putting him to bed. "You discovered something about him." Sarah hesitated, struggling between the desire to protect her son and the need to be honest. "Yes, honey. We're trying to understand what happened to your father. But don't worry, we're all safe here." Luke nodded solemnly. "I dreamed about him again, Mom. This time he was in a white place, very white, and he seemed different." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "Different how, sweetheart?" "Younger. And his eyes. They glowed in a strange way." Luke snuggled, more into his covers. "Do you think he's trying to tell us something?" She kissed his forehead, fighting back tears. "Maybe, my love. Maybe." Later, in the kitchen, Sarah shared the conversation with Richard. "These dreams," he murmured, thoughtful, "they can't be coincidence, especially considering what we discovered about Project Aurora." "What are we going to do, Richard?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying the fear and exhaustion she felt. "We can't live like this forever, always looking over our shoulder, fearing for Luke's safety." Richard pulled her close, enveloping her in a comforting hug. "We'll solve this, Sarah, I promise, but we need to be smart. Whoever is behind this is powerful and won't give up easily." That night, as the house finally quieted, Richard made a call. "Hi, it's Richard Miller. I know it's been a while, but I need a favor. It's about my brother, Charles." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yes, exactly, Project Aurora. I need you to find out everything you can, and please be discreet. Lives may depend on it." Meanwhile, in a secret laboratory miles away, a man in a lab coat observed a series of containment tanks. In each one, a human form floated, connected to dozens of tubes and sensors. He approached one of the tanks, studying the face of the man submerged. Despite the years that had passed, the similarities with Richard and Luke were undeniable. "It seems your brother is getting very curious, Charles," the scientist murmured. "Perhaps it's time for a family reunion." With a cold smile, he turned. To a control panel, his fingers hovering over a red button, marked Awakening. The promise of a dark dawn hung in the air, as the secrets of Project Aurora threatened to come to light, bringing with them consequences that no one could predict. Dawn was barely breaking when Richard's phone rang, jerking him from a restless sleep on Sarah's living room couch. He answered quickly, casting a worried look toward the silent bedrooms. "Richard, it's Edward?" The voice on the other end sounded tense, almost whispering. "I got some information about Project Aurora, but, man, this is big. Bigger than we imagined." Richard felt his heart race. "What did you discover?" "I can't say much over the phone," Edward replied. "But you need to see this in person. Meet me at the Dawn Cafe in an hour. Come alone." The call ended abruptly, leaving Richard with a sense of apprehension. He silently got up, scribbled a quick note for Sarah, and left, taking care not to wake anyone. The Dawn Cafe was a discreet establishment, mainly frequented by night workers and chronic insomniacs. Richard found Edward at a back table, partially hidden by a large decorative fern. "Here," Edward said without preamble, sliding a folder under the table, "everything I could gather about Project Aurora. But Richard, this goes far beyond medical research. We're talking about advanced genetic manipulation, alteration of human consciousness." Richard flipped through the documents, his eyes widening with each page. Complex graphs, reports of human testing, projections of applications that range from curing diseases to mass mind control. My God, he murmured. Did Charles know all this? Edward nodded grimly. From what I understand, he was a key player in the project, but at some point he must have realized how dangerous this could be if it fell into the wrong hands. And then he disappeared, Richard completed, a lump forming in his throat. There's more, Edward continued, lowering his voice even further. There are rumors that the project wasn't abandoned, that it continues in secret facilities. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. And Charles. Edward hesitated. There are unconfirmed reports of test subjects kept in a state of suspended animation. Individuals whose brainwaves are different, enhanced. Luke's words echoed in Richard's mind. He looked younger, and his eyes, they glowed in a strange way. Could it be? Before he could fully process the implications, the sound of breaking glass filled the cafe. A smoke grenade rolled across the floor, releasing a dense, suffocating cloud. "Run!" Edward shouted, pushing Richard toward the back exit. Shots echoed behind them as they ran through the dark alley. Richard clutched the folder to his chest, his heart pounding. They managed to reach Edward's car, which took off with screeching tires. Who were those guys? Richard asked, breathless. Trouble, Edward answered dryly, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. Listen, Richard, you and your family need to disappear. Now. They know you're investigating, and they won't stop at anything. Richard nodded, his mind racing. I have a plan, but I'll need your help. Meanwhile, at Sarah's house, the sound of breaking glass woke everyone with a start. Sarah ran to Luke's room, finding the boy already standing, eyes wide with fear. Mom, what's happening? Shh, honey, let's play a game, okay? She forced a smile, trying to stay calm. We're going to hide, like in that spy movie you love. Very quietly. She guided him to the closet, silently closing the door behind them. Sounds of heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Where's the boy? A deep voice asked. He's not here, Sophie, the babysitter answered. Her voice trembled but remained firm. He left with his uncle earlier. The sound of something being broken made Luke shrink in Sarah's arms. She hugged him tighter, silently, praying. After what seemed like an eternity, the house fell silent. Sarah waited a few more minutes before daring to leave their hiding place. The living room was chaos, furniture overturned and objects broken everywhere. Sophie was sitting on the couch, trembling with a cut on her forehead. They're gone, she said, her voice choked, but they said they would be back. Sarah picked up the phone with trembling hands, dialing Richard's number. After several rings, he finally answered. Sarah, thank God, are you all right? She quickly updated him on what had happened. Listen carefully, Richard said, his voice tense. Take only the essentials. A friend of mine will come to pick you up in 20 minutes. He'll take you to a safe place. I'll meet you there. Richard, I'm scared, Sarah admitted, her voice almost a whisper. I know, my love. I am too. The softness in his voice surprised her. It was the first time he had called her that. But I promise I'll protect you. We'll get through this together. Exactly. 20 minutes later, a discreet car stopped in front of the house. The driver, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, helped them get in quickly. As the car drove away, Sarah looked back, watching her house, the home she had built with so much love for Luke, disappear in the distance. Silent tears streamed down her face. Luke, sitting beside her, took her hand. Don't cry, Mom. Uncle Richard will protect us, and who knows, as maybe we'll find Dad. Sarah hugged him, impressed by the strength of her little warrior. Yes, my love, maybe we will. The car drove down the dark road, taking them to an uncertain destination. Behind them, the shadows of the past and the threats of the present mingled. Ahead, a nebulous future, but with the promise of long-sought answers. Somewhere, in a secret laboratory, lights blinked on a control panel. The awakening process had been initiated. In one of the tanks, fingers moved slightly, as if responding to a silent call. The race against time had begun. And at the center of it all, A family united by love and destiny, ready to face whatever Project Aurora had in store for them. The car wound through back roads, leaving the city behind. Luke had fallen asleep in Sarah's lap, exhausted by the adrenaline and fear. She stroked his hair absently, her eyes fixed on the landscape that passed quickly by the window. After hours of travel, they arrived at a small rural property hidden among green hills. A wooden house surrounded by a dense forest came into view. "We're here," announced the driver, speaking for the first time since they had departed. "Dr. Miller should join you soon." Sarah gently woke Luke, and together they entered the house. The interior was cozy, though simple. A fireplace occupied the center of the main room, and on the walls, shelves filled with books gave the atmosphere of a private library. "Wow!" exclaimed Luke, his eyes shining with renewed energy. "It's like Grandpa's house in the country." Sarah smiled, grateful for her son's ability to find joy even in the most difficult situations. "It is, honey. Why don't we explore a bit?" While Luke ran from one room to another, Sarah inspected the house, checking the exits and trying to familiarize herself with the new environment. That's when she noticed a curious detail. On one of the shelves, partially hidden behind some books, was a picture frame turned face down. Curious, she picked it up, and upon turning it over, felt her heart stop for an instant. It was a photo of Charles, Richard, and an older man she didn't recognize. The three smiled, wearing lab coats. In the background, a partially visible sign said, "Project Aurora." "I see you found the photo," said a voice behind her, making her startle. Sarah turned quickly, coming face to face with an elderly man with grey hair and kind eyes. He smiled gently, but there was a shadow of sadness in his gaze. "Sorry to startle you," he continued. "I'm Dr. Ernest Fields. This was my country house." "You," Sarah began, looking from the photo to the man. "You knew them?" Dr. Fields nodded slowly. "I was a mentor to Charles and Richard, and unfortunately one of the original creators of Project Aurora." Before Sarah could fully process this information, the sound of a car approaching caught her attention. Seconds later, Richard entered hurriedly, his eyes scanning the room until he found Sarah and Luke. "Thank God you're all right," he said, hugging them. Upon seeing Dr. Fields, Richard became visibly tense. "Professor, what are you doing here?" "This is my house, Richard," the old scientist replied calmly, "and I believe it's time you all knew the whole truth about Project Aurora and about Charles." They gathered around the kitchen table, steaming cups of tea in front of them. Luke, sensing the seriousness of the situation, remained quiet, carefully observing the adults. "Project Aurora," Dr. Fields began, "was born with the best intentions. We wanted to create a universal cure, something that could eradicate degenerative diseases, restore damaged minds, even prolong human life." He paused, taking a sip of tea. "Charles was brilliant. He achieved breakthroughs none of us thought possible. But then he discovered the potential for evil," Richard completed, his voice heavy with bitterness. Dr. Fields nodded sadly. "Exactly. The same compound that could heal could also be used to control, to manipulate the human mind on an unprecedented scale." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Is that why Charles disappeared?" "Yes and no," replied the old scientist. "Charles wanted to destroy the research, prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, but before he could do so, he became the first guinea pig," concluded Richard, his voice barely more than a whisper. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Luke, who had remained quiet until then, finally spoke. "Dad, is he alive?" Dr. Fields looked at the boy with a mixture of admiration and regret. "Yes, Luke. Your father is alive, but he is no longer exactly as he was before." "The dreams," Sarah murmured, recalling Luke's descriptions. "They're real, aren't they? Somehow Charles is communicating with Luke." The old scientist nodded slowly. "The Aurora project amplified certain brain capabilities. Telepathy, precognition, abilities we previously considered impossible. And it seems that the bond between father and son has transcended even physical barriers. Richard rose abruptly, walking to the window. "Where is he, Professor? Where are they keeping my brother?" Dr. Fields hesitated. "It's complicated, Richard. The facility where Charles is, it's more than a laboratory, it's a fortress, and the people who control it now are extremely dangerous." "But we have to save him," exclaimed Luke, his eyes shining with determination. "He's calling us, I know." "It!" Sarah hugged her son, fighting back tears. Richard turned to them, his face a mask of determination. "We'll bring him back," he promised, "but we need to be smart. We need a plan." Dr. Fields cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. "Tarthe, perhaps I can help with that. I still have some contacts, people who don't agree with the direction the project took." As they began to discuss strategies, Luke closed his eyes, concentrating. In his mind, he visualized the White Place, from his dreams, silently calling out to his father. Miles away in an underground laboratory, Charles' eyes suddenly opened. A strange light shone in them, and a weak smile formed on his lips. "Luke," he murmured, "I'm coming." Alarms began to sound throughout the complex. Scientists ran from one side to the other, trying to understand what was happening. At the center of it all, the tank containing Charles began to crack, the suspension liquid leaking onto the immaculate floor of the laboratory. The final battle was about to begin. A race against time, against powerful forces, and against the limits of science itself. And at the center of it all, a family united by love and destiny, ready to defy the impossible to be reunited once again. The days that followed at the country house were a frantic mixture of planning and preparation. Dr. Fields activated his network of contacts, gathering crucial information about the location and security of the facility where Charles was being held. Richard, in turn, immersed himself in his medical knowledge, trying to anticipate the state in which they would find his brother and what care he might need. Sarah alternated between helping with the preparations and caring for Luke. The boy, though excited about the prospect of rescuing his father, was becoming increasingly agitated. His dreams were becoming more intense, more vivid. "Mom," Luke said one night, his eyes large and serious, "Dad is getting stronger. He's changing things." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her son's hair. "What do you mean, honey?" Luke frowned, as if trying to explain something beyond his comprehension. "It's like he can move things with his mind. In my dream, I saw doors opening by themselves, lights flickering." She exchanged a worried look with Richard, who was standing in the doorway. The implications were frightening. If Charles was really developing abilities like telekinesis, what else had Project Aurora done to him? On the night before the rescue operation, everyone gathered in the living room. The air was loaded with tension and expectation. "All right," Dr. Fields began, spreading out plans and diagrams on the table. "The facility is located here, about 200 kilometers to the north. It's an underground structure, disguised as an agricultural research center." Richard pointed to a series of tunnels in the drawings. "These are the ventilation ducts? Can we use them to enter?" The old scientist nodded. "Yes, but they'll be heavily monitored. We'll need a distraction." "I can do that," offered Edward, the friend who had previously helped Richard. "I have experience with security systems. I can create a false alarm in another sector, divert their attention." Sarah, who until then had been silently observing, finally spoke. "What about Luke? We can't leave him here alone, but taking him would be too dangerous." Everyone was silent for a moment, considering the dilemma. That's when Luke, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, spoke up. "I need to go," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Dad is calling me. I can help find him." Richard knelt before his nephew. "Luke, I understand you want to help, but it's very risky. We can't put you in danger." The boy looked directly into his uncle's eyes. "But I'm already connected to Dad. What if he needs me to fully wake up? What if I'm the key?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Luke's words, though coming from a child, carried a weight and wisdom that no one could ignore. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "He's right. As much as I want to. Protect him, Luke, is part of this. Maybe it's destiny." Dr. Fields cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. "There's something else you need to know. The Aurora Project compound, it reacts uniquely with each individual. With Charles, it enhanced telepathic abilities and possibly telekinetic ones. But with Luke—" "What?" asked Richard, feeling a chill down his spine. "The genetic connection may amplify the effects. If Luke comes into direct contact with Charles or with any residue of the compound, we don't know what might happen. It could be dangerous, or it could be the key to everything." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone looked at Luke, who remained surprisingly calm. "I'm not afraid," he said simply. "I know Dad won't hurt me." Sarah hugged her son, silent tears streaming down her face. "My brave little boy," she whispered. With the decision made, the final preparations were completed. Equipment was checked, escape routes were memorized, and each person received their specific instructions. The next morning, as the sun was barely rising on the horizon, the group departed in 2 vehicles. In the first, Richard drove, with Sarah, and Luke in the back seat. In the second, Dr. Fields and Edward, loaded with communication and hacking equipment. The journey was silent, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. Luke, sitting between his mother and a backpack with supplies, closed his eyes, concentrating. "We're coming, Dad," he thought. "Hold on." Miles ahead, in the depths of the secret facility, Charles's eyes suddenly opened. A weak smile formed on his lips and the machines around him began to beep frantically. A scientist ran to check the monitors, his eyes widening in astonishment. "My God," he murmured, "he's waking up." Alarms began to sound throughout the complex. Guards ran to their positions. Scientists hurried to stabilize the systems. In the midst of the chaos, no one noticed the 2 discreet vans approaching the service entrance, nor the solitary figure slipping through the ventilation ducts. Operation Aurora had begun, and with it, the destiny of a family, and possibly the world, would be decided in the next crucial hours. The underground complex was a labyrinth of white, sterile corridors, illuminated by fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently. Richard and Sarah advanced cautiously, guided by Edward's whispered instructions through their earpieces. Luke walked between them, his eyes half closed in concentration. "Left at the next corridor," Edward's voice crackled. "Be careful there. Our guards approaching from Sector B." Richard made a signal, and the trio hid in a small niche in the wall. Hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by tense voices. "The primary subject is unstable," one of the guards was saying. "They can't control him." As soon as the footsteps faded away, Sarah turned to Luke. "Honey, can you sense where your father is?" The boy nodded slowly, pointing to a corridor on the right. "That way, he's calling." Following Luke's intuition, they ventured deeper into the complex. As they advanced, the signs of agitation became more evident. Distant alarms sounding, people running, and a strange hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Suddenly, all the lights went out, plunging them into total darkness. "What happened?" Sarah whispered, grabbing Luke. Edward's voice came frantically through the communicator. "Something is interfering with all the systems. It's as if someone were controlling the facility with their mind." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "Charles," he murmured. Before they could decide what to do, the lights came back on, but something was different. Instead of the cold white from before, they now pulsed with an ethereal bluish tone. "This way," Luke said with surprising certainty, guiding them down a corridor that wasn't in the original plans. They arrived at a large metal door, heavily locked and guarded by cameras. But as they watched, the security mechanisms began to fail. The cameras spun wildly and then shut off. The door emitted a series of metallic clicks. "He's helping us," Luke whispered, a small smile on his face. With a final clank, the door opened, revealing a vast, circular room. In the center, surrounded by medical equipment and monitoring screens, was a containment tank, and inside it, Floating in a bluish liquid was Charles. "My God," Sarah gasped, her hands covering her mouth. Richard ran to the tank, his eyes quickly examining the monitors around it. "His vital signs are stable, but something's wrong. These brain patterns, I've never seen anything like it." Luke slowly approached the tank, his eyes fixed on the father he had never known. He raised his hand, touching the cold glass. "Dad?" he called softly. At that instant, Charles's eyes opened. They were no longer the brown eyes Sarah remembered. Now they shone with an intense blue, almost supernatural. A smile formed on his lips, and suddenly the liquid in the tank began to bubble violently. Alarms sounded throughout the room. "What's happening?" Sarah shouted, pulling Luke away. Richard struggled with the controls, trying to understand what was going on. "The tank, it's destabilizing. Charles is coming out." With a deafening crash, the glass of the tank shattered. The blue liquid spread across the floor, and in the midst of the debris, Charles rose, his skin glowing with a strange luminescence. "Charles," Richard called hesitantly, taking a step toward his brother. Charles slowly turned his head, his blue eyes scanning the room until they fixed on Luke. A smile spread across his face. "My son," he said, his voice echoing in a way that didn't seem entirely human. "Finally." Luke stepped forward, ignoring Sarah's protests. "Dad," he responded simply. At that moment, the doors to the room violently burst open. A group of armed guards and panicked scientists invaded the place. "Move away from the subject," one of the guards shouted, pointing his weapon. Charles raised his hand and, with a gesture, all the intruders were thrown back as if hit by an invisible force. Equipment began to float. Lights flickered frantically. "We need to get out of here," Richard shouted, trying to reach Charles. But his brother seemed in a trance, his eyes fixed on Luke. "The next step of evolution," he murmured. "The future of humanity." He extended his hand to his son. Luke, as if hypnotized, began to walk toward him. "Luke, no!" Sarah cried desperately. But it was too late. The moment father and son's hands touched, a wave of blue energy exploded around them. Richard and Sarah were thrown back, while the entire complex shook as if hit by an earthquake. Through blurred vision, Sarah saw Luke and Charles wrapped in a cocoon of blue light. The boy floated in the air, his eyes now as blue as his father's. "What's happening to them?" she shouted to Richard, who was struggling to stand up. "I don't know," he answered, his voice trembling, "but I think we just witnessed the true power of Project Aurora." As chaos unfolded around them, father and son remained suspended in the air, their minds united in a plane that no one else could comprehend. The fate of humanity hung by a thread, and at the center of it all was a family reunited after years of separation, facing an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. The final battle was just beginning, and the world as they knew it was about to change forever. The world around Sarah and Richard seemed to move in slow motion. In the center of the room, wrapped in an aura of pulsating blue light, Charles and Luke floated, their minds united in a connection that transcended common human understanding. "Charles! Luke!" Sarah shouted, her voice almost lost in the chaos of alarms and screams echoing through the facility. Richard, recovering from the initial shock, tried to approach the energy field surrounding his brother and nephew. An invisible force repelled him, throwing him back several meters. "It's useless," he shouted to Sarah. "We can't reach them physically." At that moment, Dr. Fields's voice crackled through the communicator. "Richard, Sarah, you need to get out of there immediately. The energy levels are out of control. The entire complex could collapse." Sarah felt despair grow in her chest. "We can't leave them," she shouted back, tears streaming down her face. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Luke's voice, amplified and ethereal, echoed throughout the room. "Mum, Uncle Richard, don't be afraid, we're fine. Dad and we understand now." Charles, his eyes shining with supernatural intensity, finally spoke. Project Aurora wasn't about control or power. It was about evolution, about unlocking the true potential of the human mind. Richard stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Charles, what's happening to you?" "We're becoming something more," Charles replied, a serene smile on his face. "Something that can change the world for the better." Suddenly, the walls began to shake. Pieces of the ceiling were falling around them. "We have to go," Richard shouted, grabbing Sarah by the arm. But she resisted, her eyes fixed on Luke. "I won't leave my son." It was then that Luke turned to her, his bright blue eyes full of love and understanding beyond his years. "It's okay, Mum. Trust us. We'll meet again, I promise." With a broken heart, but trusting in her son's promise, Sarah allowed Richard to guide her out. They ran through the chaotic corridors, dodging debris and panicked people. When they finally emerged on the surface, they were greeted by a surreal scene. The sky above the complex was tinged with a supernatural blue, undulating like an aurora borealis. Dr. Fields and Edward ran to them. "Thank God you're all right," the old scientist exclaimed. "But where are Charles and Luke?" Before they could answer, a pillar of blue light exploded from the center of the facility, reaching the sky. The earth trembled, and for a moment, everyone feared the worst had happened. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. From the epicenter of the explosion, two figures emerged, walking calmly. Charles and Luke, hand in hand, their bodies still emanating a soft blue glow. Sarah ran toward them, stopping a few steps away, uncertain. "Luke? Charles?" Luke smiled, that same innocent and loving smile she knew so well. "Mom," he said simply, hugging her. Charles slowly approached Richard. The brothers stared at each other for a long moment, before embracing years of separation. And pain finally dissolved. "What happened in there?" Dr. Fields asked, his voice a mixture of amazement and scientific curiosity. Charles, still embracing Richard, replied, "Project Aurora reached its true potential, not as a weapon or tool of control, but as a catalyst for the next stage of human evolution." "And what does that mean exactly?" Sarah asked, still holding Luke close. Luke answered, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "It means we can help people, Mum. Cure diseases, resolve conflicts, restore the planet's balance. But how?" Richard questioned, looking from Charles to Luke. "Through connection," Charles explained. "The Aurora Project compound not only amplified our mental abilities, but connected us at a deeper level with everything around us. We can feel the world's needs, and now we have the power to meet them." Dr. Fields seemed amazed. "This is revolutionary, but what about the risks, the potential for abuse?" "That's why we need you," Luke said, looking at each of them. "We can't do this alone. We need guidance, balance." Charles nodded. "The power we now have is immense, but it's also a great responsibility. We need our family, people who love us and will keep us on the right path." Sarah looked at Richard, tears of relief and hope in her eyes. He returned the look, a silent understanding passing between them. Their family, so strangely reunited, now had a greater purpose. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, the world witnessed extraordinary changes. Diseases previously incurable began to disappear. Long and seemingly insoluble conflicts found peaceful resolutions. The environment, so mistreated for decades of abuse, began to regenerate at an unprecedented rate. At the center of it all was a family united by love, destiny, and now a common purpose. Charles and Luke, with their extraordinary gifts, led the way to a brighter future. Sarah and Richard, with their compassion and wisdom, ensured that power was used with responsibility and empathy. And so, from a project born in the shadows, arose an aurora of hope for all humanity. The family that was once separated by science was now united by it, bringing light to a world that so needed it. As the sun set on another day of miraculous transformations, Sarah watched her family gathered on the porch of the house they now shared. Charles and Richard talked animatedly about new projects to help needy communities. Luke played with his new little brother, a baby with curious eyes who already showed signs of sharing the special gifts of his older brother. With a heart full of gratitude and hope, Sarah smiled. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but each step brought them here, a place of love, purpose, and infinite possibilities. And so, under the sky, painted with the colors of twilight, the family that defied destiny, science, and time itself continued its mission to illuminate the world, one miracle at a time. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Sarah, Richard, Charles, and little Luke has touched your hearts. To continue exploring equally moving and inspiring stories, we've prepared a special playlist with narratives that challenge the limits of the possible. Find it here by clicking on the link to the left. If this story captivated you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of love, and the infinite possibilities of the future. Share with us in the comments, what other adventures would you like to see this extraordinary family experience? Your ideas might inspire our next great narrative. Until the next story, where once again we'll dive together into the wonders of the unexpected and the magic of love that overcomes